Hello everyone, this is part 4 of all the women that are currently on death row in the US. Let's see why they received the death penalty. Margaret Allen, 12 years on death row in the state of Florida. Allen was found guilty of killing and torturing Wenda Wright, her housekeeper. According to reports, she believed Wright had taken cash from her purse. Wright was strangled with a belt, according to the prosecution, after hours of torture. James Martin, Allen's roommate, and Quinton Allen, Allen's nephew, were both found guilty for their roles in assisting the woman in her attempt to bury the body in a shallow grave. Allen persuaded her 17-year-old nephew to use a belt to bind Wright's wrists and legs. She then beat and tortured Wright for more than 2 hours while pouring hairspray, rubbing alcohol, bleach, and nail paint remover on her face and down her throat. One of Allen's kids entered the room after hearing Wright's calls for help and saw what was happening. Allen forced the youngster to cover Wright's mouth with duct tape, but it wouldn't stay due to how moist her face was. Allen then decided to use a belt to choke Wright. Allen's nephew, Quinton, could not believe what he had done, so he went to the police and confessed to everything, and he even led the officers to the place Wright's remains were buried. The teenager was sentenced to 15 years in prison, and James Martin, who helped bury the body, got 5 years in prison, while Allen received the death penalty. Lasonya Brown, 10 years on death row in the state of Florida. Brown was found guilty of using a crowbar to beat 19-year-old Audriana Zimmerman, shocking her with a stun gun, and setting her on fire in the family home. At her own trial, Brittany Miller, who was the daughter of Lasonya Brown and only 16 years old, admitted to the judge that the original plan had been to just fight Zimmerman, but things spiraled out of control. It was said that the argument over a man was the cause of the attack. The group assaulted Zimmerman and used the stun gun on her before locking her in the trunk of a car, taking her to a wooded area, dousing her in gasoline, and lighting her on fire. Despite having 60% of her body covered in serious burns, Zimmerman was still able to rush to a nearby house and dial 911, but after 2 weeks she passed away. Only one of the 3 co-defendants in the case, Lasonya Brown, was given the death penalty. Brittany, her daughter, received a life sentence for her involvement in the murder, and the third murderous conspirator was Heather Lee, a friend and neighbor of Miller and Lasonya Brown. After entering a plea deal with the government, she was given a 25 years prison term. In her appeal, Lasonya Brown made a strong case for Lee being the most accountable for Zimmerman's death. According to the appeal, Lee wanted to get revenge on Zimmerman for having an affair with her husband. All of the attack's weapons, including the gas can, crowbar, and stun gun, were claimed to have originated from Lee's home, and Lee later told friends that she had been responsible for setting Zimmerman on fire. Now, I don't know about you, but it sounds to me that even if Lee was the one who wanted Audriana dead, all 3 women participated in the crime and they were just as guilty. Brown's strategy maybe could have gotten Lee to be given a harsher punishment, but I don't believe her own sentence would have been changed anyways. Tiffany Caudill, 15 years on death row in the state of Florida. Caudill was found guilty of kidnapping and murdering Florida couple Carol and Reggie Sumner in the first degree, along with 3 other men, Alan Wade, Bruce Nixon, and Caull's boyfriend Michael Jackson. No, not that Michael Jackson. Caudill lived next door to the Sumners in South Carolina before they migrated to Florida. The crew robbed the Sumners while they were visiting them in Florida, then drove them into Georgia where they were buried alive. Caudill withdrew money from an ATM using a couple's card, which made it possible to track down 3 of the group, who were later found in a South Carolina motel. After being apprehended, Nixon freely led police to the cemetery where the Sumners were buried. Although both victims had been able to escape their shackles, they only had time to embrace each other before passing away. Jackson and Wade were also given the death penalty. Nixon admitted to second-degree murder and was given a 45 years prison term after guiding authorities to the bodies and giving evidence against the other defendants. Robin Lee Rowe, 29 years on death row in the state of Idaho. Rowe killed her husband and 2 children when she set fire to their Ada County house. She is the only female on death row in Idaho. The killings happened on February 10, 1992, when a fire broke out on the first floor of the apartment where Rowe's husband, from which she was separated, and her 2 kids were residing. Her husband Randy and children Joshua, 10 years old, and Tabitha, 8 years old, were discovered dead when emergency personnel arrived at the scene of the burning building. Carbon monoxide poisoning caused the deaths of the 3 people. Fire investigators came to the conclusion that the smoke alarm had been switched off and that a liquid accelerant had been utilized to start the fire. Rowe was the primary suspect. There were many warning signs that pointed to Robin Rowe as the major suspect. One of Robin Rowe's 2 additional children reportedly passed away from sudden infant death syndrome. The other, a toddler boy, perished in a mystery fire in California. She and her son Keith were residing in a California cottage back in 1980. Her child was killed in a fire that started when his blankets caught fire from a portable heater. Rowe received $28,000 on the life insurance coverage after the boy passed away. Detectives discovered that Rowe had purchased over $250,000 worth of life insurance policy on her husband and kids. Virginia Susan Caudill, 23 years on death row in the state of Kentucky. Using a hammer, Virginia Caudill and Jonathan Goforth killed Lonita White after breaking into her home to find money for drugs. Her body was wrapped in a carpet and loaded into the trunk of her own car after they searched the house for valuables. The vehicle was taken to a deserted area, doused in gasoline, and set ablaze. Her death was attributed to severe head trauma, including strikes that caused portions of her skull to cave in, according to an autopsy. In the months following the killing, according to the prosecution, the 2 escaped to Florida and Mississippi. In New Orleans, Caudill was taken into custody by police 8 months after the murder. In 2010, Franklin Circuit Judge Philip Shepard issued an injunction that prevents Kentucky from carrying out any executions. Shepard approved the state's plan to carry out a lethal injection with 1 or 2 medicines. He decided that because of problems with how prisoners are treated and their mental condition evaluated in the days and weeks preceding an execution date, there cannot be any more executions. Since the capital penalty was reinstated in Kentucky in 1976, 3 people have been put to death. 2008 saw the execution of the last prisoner, Antoinette Frank, 27 years on death row in the state of Louisiana. In 1995, Antoinette Frank, then a rookie New Orleans police officer, tormented the family-run Kim Ann restaurant with Roger Lacaze, killing Officer Ronald Williams and the Wu siblings Ha and Kwong in the process. Author Chuck Hustmeyer, a former policeman himself, claims that Frank lied about her psychological and psychiatric state when she applied to be a cop in Louisiana in order to be appointed as a policewoman. Frank worked for the New Orleans Police Department for a little less than a year, despite being found to have lied in various areas of her application. She met her future boyfriend during a shooting. Roger Lacaze, a drug dealer, was seriously hurt and needed Frank's assistance that night as well as hospitalization. Frank fell in love with Lacaze, even if he was 18 years old when they met and she was 5 years older than him. It is reported that she even let him drive her police car. The pair decided to rob the Vietnamese restaurant on March 4, 1995. They both got caught and sentenced to death for the murders, but Lacaze was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in December 2019. It is important to mention that the last execution of a woman in the state of Louisiana was carried out back in 1942, when Tony Joe Henry died in the electric chair. Lisa Jo Chamberlin, 16 years on death row in the state of Mississippi. Chamberlin and her boyfriend Roger Lee Gillett were charged with the murders of Linda Heinzelman and Heinzelman's boyfriend Vernon Hollett. The criminal couple was dealing drugs and fearing Linda would turn them into the police, they decided to get rid of her. Her partner Vernon, who was actually Gillett's cousin, was at the house as well. They used a hammer to beat him to death, causing the hammer's metal handle to bend and cave in his skull. Linda passed away after 2 days of agony. Her throat was cut and a plastic bag was pulled over her head to suffocate her. She was also beaten, stabbed, and essayed with an inert object. After all that, she was suffocated by a pillow, which caused her death. Gillett and Chamberlin dismembered the corpses with a hacksaw. They placed them in a chest freezer that had been put into Hollett's vehicle and then drove 15 hours, over 1,000 miles, while bringing 7 bags of evidence that they dumped at the Russell County landfill. Gillett and Chamberlin towed the truck into a shed at the Waldo farm owned by Gillett's family. According to court filings, at that point they plugged in the freezer and sealed it with a roll of gray duct tape. As people were witnessing Lisa Jo Chamberlin and Roger Gillett selling meth while driving around in the victim's car, they called the police, who opened an investigation and subsequently charged the two with murder. Blanche Taylor Moore, 32 years on death row in the state of North Carolina. Moore was found guilty of poisoning her boyfriend's food with arsenic, which led to his death. Moore is suspected of using the same method to kill 3 additional people and nearly kill a 4th. Police started looking into Moore in 1989 after her second husband, Dwight Moore, developed odd medical complaints. His condition was caused by arsenic poisoning, according to toxicology tests that were ordered by a doctor. He ingested a significant amount of poison over the course of a week, yet he managed to survive. The bodies of Moore's first husband, James Taylor, who passed away in 1973, and her ex-boyfriend, Raymond Reed, were requested to be excavated by the police after they developed suspicions about Moore. It was discovered that both males had been poisoned with arsenic. Moore's father passed away from symptoms resembling those of arsenic poisoning as well. Other alleged victims include a number of close friends and family members who unexpectedly passed away while displaying some symptoms of poisoning, although none of them had been excavated for additional analysis. Her mother-in-law, Isla Taylor, is another potential victim. According to rumors, Moore killed the men in her life because of a deep hatred for her drunken father, who compelled her to become a prostitute in order to support the family. Carlette Parker, 24 years on death row in the state of North Carolina. Alice Covington, who was 88 years old, was being cared for by Parker, a home health care provider. She is accused of taking about $44,000 from Covington's account. Parker is said to have killed her by drowning her in a bathtub when Covington confronted her. In addition to pepper spray on Covington's clothing and potential burns from a stun gun, the autopsy discovered bruises around her ankles and legs. Parker was in possession of a stun gun and pepper spray at the time of her arrest. After Covington went missing from Raleigh's luxury retirement community Springmore, police had reasons to believe there had been criminal play. Her 1993 Mercury Sable, which had been abandoned in a Morrisville field close to Davis Drive and Coppers Road, was later found to contain her body. The victim's face, neck, hands, upper arms, left wrists, upper left back, and upper part of both arms all had significant bruises, according to investigators. A laceration was present on the victim's left wrist as well as her lower left leg. Donna Roberts, 19 years on death row in the state of Ohio. Roberts was found guilty in connection with her ex-husband's Robert Fingerhut's death in 2001. Authorities claim that she encouraged her inmate boyfriend, Nate Jackson, to perpetrate the act. Robert Fingerhut, her late husband, and Roberts first met in 1980. In 1983, they got married and acquired a house in Miami, near Miami Gardens and Ives Estates. Later, the couple sold their house and relocated to Richmond, Virginia, for a year before returning to Roberts' birthplace of Youngstown, Ohio in 1993. Roberts was at her third marriage. According to court records, Donna Roberts hired an inmate to kill her husband, and after the offender was freed from jail, he carried out her instructions. Nate Jackson, the person who really drew the gun, informed investigators that Roberts had nothing to do with the murder, but correspondence from prison and phone calls revealed that she had indeed done what the prosecution claimed. Both received death sentences for plotting to have Fingerhut killed so that Roberts could receive more than $500,000 in life insurance payouts. That was it for today, guys. See you on Friday for part 5 and actually the last part of all the women on death row in the US. Until then, go watch this video on the screen right now. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye bye.